Dear delegates, I feel honored to read out few lines about our eminent second keynote speaker and guest of honor, Dr. M.S. Sahu, Chairman, Insolvency and Bankruptcy Board of India. Dr. M.S. Sahu, an acclaimed thought leader in the areas of securities markets and a distinguished public servant, currently serves as chairperson of the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Board of India. He has served as a member of the Competition Commission of India, Secretary of the Institute of Company Secretaries of India, whole-time member of the Securities and Exchange Board of India, economic advisor with National Stock Exchange of India. Actually, we have a few more lines, sir. And he held various senior positions in Government of India as member of Indian Economic Service. He also had a brief but eventful legal practice. Dr. Sahu substantially influenced reforms in Indian securities markets over the last 2 decades. He has conceptualized, designed, and steered major reforms such as dematerialization of securities in 1995, architecture of regulator and regulatory tribunal in 1995, trading of derivatives in 1999, online examination for market professionals in 2000. He has set up National Institute of Securities Market in 2004, resolution of litigations relating to brokers' fee in 2004, demutualization of stock exchanges in 2005, trading of currency derivatives in 2008, and the rule of law in securities markets. He is credited with few landmark orders, including disgorgement and settlement of currencies market infractions, and significantly contributed to development of securities jurisprudence. Now I request, sir, to deliver your keynote address. Thank you.
Thank you. Respected IBA Chairman and SBI Chairman, Mr. Kumar. My colleague on the board of IBBI, Mr. Singh, who is also Joint Secretary in the Ministry of Corporate Affairs. Mr. Kanan, CEO of IBA, my dear bankers, insolvency professionals, friends, ladies and gentlemen. I must thank IBA for giving me this opportunity to tell you what you already know, and you know much better than I do. Just Chairman SBI just refreshed my memory about the BIFR. There is a recent quiz, financial literacy quiz. So there they ask a set of words, abbreviations, and tell the full form of the abbreviations. So these quizzes use the words like CDR, SDR, S4A, JLF, BIFR, SICA. Many of the people failed to provide full form of these abbreviations, but they could respond very quickly to IBC, IP, IRP, RP, CIRP, COC, haircut, moratorium. So all these words now have replaced the earlier set of words in the bankers' vocabulary. So that is the change that has happened over the last 3 years from a common man's understanding. In fact, the World Bank conducts an annual examination of different economies in terms of ease of doing business. It declared the result of its last examination on 24th October 2019, where, of course, on many other parameters, India came out with the flying colors. But in terms of the parameter called resolving insolvency, its rank improved from 108 to 52. And that is the outcome of your hard work over the last 3 years. In fact, in one of the programs, Justice Mr. Sikri was speaking, and Mr. Singh was also there. So he told that such competitions happen internationally. There are so many transparency, international competitiveness. So on various parameters, countries are evaluated where they stand. And in many things, India comes, let's say, at position of 20, 50, 100, When we started the journey at the beginning of 2014, this government coming to power, we were at 142nd position in ease of doing business. But there was another competition where that was conducted by Global Restructuring Review earlier in 2018. And they have a category of award called the most improved jurisdiction in terms of restructuring. And India came there at number 1. In fact, they came down to India to give the awards. So Justice Sikri was mentioning that we have got various positions, but this is one where we are right at the top. We do programs like this. We do not have really kind of educational course. We started somewhere about what Mr. Singh was elaborating. We didn't have something, everything was new law, new profession, new NCLT. Everybody was on a learning curve. And we are trying to learn, but we are trying to do something different and something ahead of the world. So in terms of insolvency profession, we have also moved quite substantially in another profession called registered valuers. So in insolvency profession, India has started something called graduate insolvency program, which is unique, which is first of its kind in the world, which is a 2-year program for company secretaries, chartered accountants, cost accountants, and advocates. They can do this 2-year program and right away they are eligible to become insolvency professional without requiring any experience. The point I am making is that though there is no formal educational course teaching insolvency as of now, not that our IPs have not delivered, they have done outstanding work. There was a competition in April 2019 among the student community. That is Ian Fletcher International Insolvency Law Moot held in Singapore in the first week of April 19. And that is one place where one of the Indian universities came right at the top. That is NLIU Bhopal. So this only indicates that, again in the last 3 years, how much of a professionalization has happened in the country in insolvency and restructuring. Of course, government has always been at the forefront, demonstrated the highest commitment when they designed the IBC, where they told that my dues will have the least priority only above the equity. And in the last amendment, Mr. Singh referred, there he told that a resolution plan approved by the adjudicating authority is binding on me and every state government and every local authority. You imagine the big 12 accounts, which people call having 1/4 of NPA of the banking system. Government pushed those in the very early days of insolvency regime. If you remember, so IBBI was set up on 1st October and it was mandated to start corporate insolvency on 1st December. It started. Everything was put in place. IPAs were incorporated. Incorporating a company also takes time. But people were persuaded to set up IPAs. IPAs were incorporated. IPAs came in. All regulations were written. Everything was done. And the process commenced on 1st December. In February that year, following February, there was an economic survey where it was told that this insolvency has started, but it's in infancy. It has to be tried out with the small cases. Probably let's look for another option called bad bank. They used a fancy word in economic survey, but then suddenly they changed their view. In 3 months' time, 2 months' time, that insolvency profession, insolvency regime, ecosystem, regulations have come up in 3 months to such a standard that where they can push these big 12 into this framework. So that is again showing that the confidence of the system, confidence of the stakeholders in using IBC. If you have noticed very recently, 2 new things have happened, again reflecting the confidence of the IBC system. One is, Justice Raut is here. He has admitted a matter, an application filed by Reserve Bank of India for insolvency resolution of DHFL. So Government of India had extended the provisions of IBC with certain modifications to allow resolution of financial service providers. Not every financial service provider can be done. There are issues, but to meet the immediate need, at least as a stopgap arrangement, there is a framework to address the concern, and an administrator has been appointed. He has started the work. Another revalidation is from 1st of December 2019. The insolvency resolution of a small part of individual insolvency has commenced, that is the personal guarantors to corporate debtors. We had corporate debtors from day one, 1st December. We had corporate guarantors to corporate debtors from day one, but there was still some missing gap, and now this complements corporate insolvency resolution while to start a new learning. All that last 3 years we invested in learning the corporate part. Now we have shifted our gear to learn the individual insolvency part. So these are the kind of revalidations that IBC is working. And again, this is happening. Mr. Singh was talking about the role of a COC. What is happening is actually an orchestra. In orchestra, different stakeholders have different roles. There are two sets of people in this game. One is the oversight mechanism, comprising government, IBBI, adjudicating authority, appellate authority, including court system. Then all the professionals led by the insolvency professional. So this set of people are there just to help the stakeholders to take the decision. They will not take any decision. They are there to ensure that you play their kind of umpire, but they have different roles, which have been much better clarified in the SR matter by the Honorable Supreme Court. In fact, in earlier orders also Supreme Court did it. There everyone's role is defined. But this is the market mechanism. It tells that insolvency has arisen from a market problem, and it is only the market that must address the problem. That's why there is another set of stakeholders having a direct stake, being interested parties. They have been told that you decide your fate. So one side, the entire mechanism, oversight mechanism to help the immediate stakeholders to decide the fate of the company, and that category includes the financial creditors, operational creditors, corporate debtor, committee of creditors, the resolution applicants. They are the people who are taking decision. Financial creditor is taking decision whether I should initiate application. Financial creditor deciding whether to rehabilitate, liquidate it. Resolution applicant is deciding whether it is a project which is worth taking, I should make an investment. So all commercial decisions are taken by them. And they also play by the rule of the game. But the fundamental decision, even after everybody else has taken decision, the financial creditor has taken decision, resolution applicant taken decision, but the last final crucial approval rests with the committee of creditors. The life of the company is in fact in the hands of the creditors. So I'll come to that a little later, but let me come back to what committee of creditors did in the very first insolvency resolution, Synergy Dure Automotives Limited. That was a company where the company was in BIFR for about 10-15 years with negative net worth, admitted into the process. It was a Hyderabad-based company. On the date of commencement of the CIRP, this company had an accumulated claims of 900 plus crore with a liquidation value of 8 crore. That was resolved where of creditors took a haircut of 94-95%. So this actually set the alarm bells. Did we want an insolvency regime, IBC, for the bankers to have a haircut of 95%? Why not simply give up this 5% and close the matter? Why go through all this process? But if that if the IBC had not come, this company would have continued to remain in BIFR for another N years, and the value of that 8 crore balance, 8 crore would have become zero, which Mr. Kumar emphasized that if you have to do something, do it in time, when it is possible to rescue the patient, not at the last moment or patient has gone to coma. So in that case, assuming also that the company has to be liquidated, creditors had taken a decision to liquidate it, then they would have got at best 8 crore minus the cost of liquidation. But they got 54 crore, which is 600 times of the liquidation value. And this is a very important decision, though at that time SBI and other people were not there. I believe there are other major stakeholders. But they took a decision or dared to take a decision to take the haircut of 95%, got severe criticism in India, abroad, ignoring none of these papers wrote that they have got 6 times of the liquidation value. And that is again, Mr. Singh told, this is only an incidental that they got 6 times or whatever, but that is after rescuing the company. Company survived, the employment survived, everything continued. Creditors got something which is 6 times of the liquidation value. But that, being the very first case, we are all learning, and that changed the insolvency trajectory forever. It was challenged on many counts. The very first order was challenged on many counts before NCLAT, starting from that 2 days before this law came into force, somebody transferred, one of the related parties transferred. This was the economic side that people got this much money, but there are other legal complications which changed the trajectory. One minor point was that a related party creditor transferred the debt to a non-related party financial creditor, and therefore, and that was a big chunk, 60, 70 or 80% of voting power, and that is why clandestinely the existing promoters managed to take control of that. So whether that transfer is possible or not, that was debated, and finally NCLAT told yes, there is nothing wrong. Transfer has happened through due process, and it happened before this law came into force. There is nothing unusual in that. There was issue about government dues. What kind of treatment it should get? This matter also sorted out that government dues are operational creditors. In this matter, it came up that Synergy Dure Automotives got amalgamated with another company, again in a group company. Resolution plan is defined to mean a plan which resolves insolvency of a corporate debtor as a going concern. So question arose, if one company is getting amalgamated with another company is disappearing, is it a going concern? That was also debated, and whether NCLT can do under IBC approve amalgamation, which it could have done under Companies Act, though there is explicit provision in the CIRP saying that amalgamation is one of the means of resolution. And that was made more explicit in this latest amendment act, saying that resolution plan can provide for any kinds of restructuring, all the things. These are the things happened, but the bigger thing was that all of us now understand everything called 29A. This was the company where, as I told, the same set of company remained within the group, remained with the same set of people who, I won't attribute motive, but for whatever reason, under their control, the company's performance had deteriorated. So do we want the person who contributed or even not contributed, a complete stranger, outside person, who does not have a capability, credibility to resolve, turn around, to come in, take over the company? Then we have the issue of moral hazard. The game goes on. You will come up with every year, yearly basis, law allows after 1 year probably one can come up. So you will have an yearly cycle of resolution and moving towards liquidation. And then came the 29A, which told that we do not want any more incredible people, incapable people, in the sense who have kind of NPA beyond a certain time or willful default, whose conduct is doubtful. We do not want this repeat game, and we do not want the risks somebody takes is falling on someone else. So I take the risk, but I don't suffer the consequences. That does not work out. So the very fast resolution plan changed everything actually, and including the latest one, as I told you, NCL, it is series of orders on this, as well as the latest Amendment Act. So now let me come to that we have moved to a market economy. So what we have done is actually we have unleashed animal spirit at the marketplace. It's a battlefield. There are games, fair games, unfair games. There are rules in place to address, restrict, control, penalize unfair games or unfair battles. But there are two big battles, fair battles, which we always welcome because those two battles in our interest, and those two battles are the battles of competition and innovation. What happens in a competition is that an efficient farm kills an inefficient farm perfectly in order. Killing another farm is welcome because you are releasing the resources for better uses, either through IBC resolution process or simply closing the company through a liquidation process. Killing another company, if that is inefficient, is well and good, but you should kill it by an efficient, fair method. In innovation, new order drives out old order. In fact, we call it the so-called creative destruction that destroys more companies than it creates. So these are the two things which give us growth, competition and innovation. Higher is the intensity of competition and innovation, the higher is the incidence of failure, higher is the death of companies. But these two are important. Imagine the kind of people can do competition and innovation if people have freedom. And we gave this freedom since in 1992. And the impact of this freedom is that the average growth rate in Indian economy in terms of GNP has been a percentage. You can debate, there are cyclical fluctuations, but on average since the reform since 92 till 2019, over 27 years, has been a rate which is more than the double the rate we used to have from 47 to 92. That is the direct impact of freedom, that what World Bank calls ease of doing business. People have the freedom to do. If I can give a number to this, there's a global World Economic Forum that comes out with a report called Global Competitiveness Report. While assessing the competitiveness of economies, it classifies the economies into 5 categories according to their stages of development. It believes that broadly there are 3 sources of growth. They come from the basic institutions, rule of law, factors of production. Second is the efficiency factors coming from competition, and third is the innovation and sophistication. The economies which rely on the first set of factors, factor-driven mostly, they have a per capita GNP of less than $2,000. The companies at the other extreme, in the 5th category, where growth comes from competition and innovation, they typically have a per capita GNP of not less than $17,000. So the entire distance from $2,000 to $17,000 is explained by these 2 factors, competition and innovation. So business is failing. Because of competition, somebody is running faster, somebody is behind. Because of innovation, somebody is not able to produce and sell, that does not have a market at all. So what it means is that at marketplace, we have accumulated resources of the people. Somebody has given money, somebody has given labor, somebody has given capital, something. There are companies, organized economic activity, resources of the country are at this disposal but are not being used properly. This law enables that. Let's find out a way how to use these resources optimally. Resources being limited should work for us. all 7 days of the week and all 24 hours of the day. Let's find out if the same people can't do it, let's get a new set of persons to do it, and absolutely feel that that cannot be done at all, let's move to another person who can do it. So now let me tell you, as I told you, it's necessary competition and innovation should kill the businesses. There should not be unfair competition. Business should not die, farm should not die because of unfair competition, because there is a competition authority of the country which protects farms also that they don't suffer on account of unfair competition. But because of fair competition also, though it is good, companies should die, but companies should not have a premature death. That is what something falls on the committee of creditors to identify, not committee of creditors, in fact the financial creditor, whom the Supreme Court has repeatedly telling that they are the supreme in commercial matters, they are at least in a better position on average if you don't go to, by the generality of the provision what Supreme Court told in Swiss Re once, that they have on average better business ability to take the calls and smell it when the company is likely to face distress and should take action quite early. And if actions are taken quite early, the outcome would be good. Sometimes we get criticism that, forget about Synergy Dure where we had 95% haircut, because that was in BIFR system. But today also about 75-80% of the companies which have been admitted into the resolution process are getting into liquidation. Again, our data shows 80% of those companies were either in BIFR or not going concerns. So if you start early, but nevertheless, we have got the realization for financial creditors is about 42-43%, which works out about 190 or 200% of the liquidation value. And all that we have got after rescuing the company, after making a significant behavioral change. That's why I say that the outcome of this has been what happens under the code through resolutions, what happens on account of the code, because thousands of applications are withdrawn before they are admitted, and another thousands of matters which do not reach NCLT, the applications are not filed, those are also resolved. The total impact of the code is what happens under the code, on account of the code, and in the shadow of the code. But we have also experienced that the companies which have come quite early into this, there are quite a few cases where financial creditors have realized 100%. So that only means that you have to really diagnose at the right time, and not that if you know that the entire sector is in a bad shape, and if you, every financial creditor, operational creditor triggers it, every company is doing bad, probably you may not get a resolution applicant. That's why it is an application of mind whether, even if there is a default of 1 lakh, I have an entitlement, but I have a discretion and I must use my mind to exercise discretion, and I should be actually asked by my stakeholders, did I intervene at the right time, or did I unwarrantedly push a company to death? So companies is a kind of now the modern temples of growth now. Resources of the society, companies have grown over the years, their size is too big, and expectation is too much from the companies. Theoretically, we say that the company is a legal person, having its identity, independent of its stakeholders. Shareholders own only the shares of the company. No one, not even the shareholders, jointly, collectively, own the company or its properties. Company has no owner as such, a legal position is this. Second is that since company does not have a mind of its own, it acts through its immediate stakeholders, and each stakeholder has its own independent objective function, meaning thereby he has a set of rights, interests, and level of engagement with the company. Two stakeholders do not have same objectives, same level of engagement. Consequently, the interest of one stakeholder may conflict with those of another or of the company, and at times the stakeholders may work at cross purposes, even against the interest of the company sometimes, and some of them, even quite a few of them, try to leave the company at the earliest instance of distress. Let me go and sell the shares and invest elsewhere. Company is going down somewhere, instead of trying to rescue the company. And often, if a very big stakeholder leaves the company is really orphaned. It has indefinite life by law, but there is always a continuous threat. I told, marketplace is a battlefield, continuous threat to its life. Every other company is its predator. A company swallows up another company for its own growth through hostile takeover, through friendly takeover. Company takes too much of risk at times for its own survival, which becomes its own nemesis. And it loses business to others on account of competition. And as I told, creative destruction kills many companies. Law today provides a process to end the company's life under certain circumstances. So in the name of ease of doing business, the death of a company has become as easy as the start of a company or beginning of a company. So it's not surprising today that the average life of S&P 500 companies, about 100 years ago in 1919, their average life was 90 years. In 2019, the average life of these companies, S&P 500 companies, is 18 years. That is the change has happened over 100 years. All big companies you find today, probably Microsoft is the oldest of them. All of them are in their teens now. So all big companies are 10-year, 15-year, 20-year old. And you compare this with the human longevity. In 1919, it was 32, 33 years. And now we have reached 90 years. So the humans created companies to live beyond them because I can't live longer. Let me create a company which will carry what I wanted to do beyond me. But now companies are dying earlier than humans. So why it is happening is because there are so many forces so many stakeholders, they are trying to pull the company apart in different directions. And nobody is there, it has no owner, nobody is there in the company's distress, and market is very dangerous. So the problem is the threat of the life of the company is under threat. And if the company has to continue to exist, because without company we have no other option actually. Because we don't expect the NGOs, government to do so much of other activities. Companies, the only way we have to move ahead. The growth is coming from the companies, and companies have to be rescued. So, since there are many people are trying to pull apart, I'll tell you two big conflicts. There are many hundreds actually. Two big major chunks which are to be addressed through the laws and are being addressed. One is the one critical balance is between all of us know that the companies have limited liability, which is the foundation of business. Because shareholders have a limited liability, all that we have done over the last 300 years could happen. We have 15 lakh companies in India or elsewhere. But the shareholders enjoy limited liability because the society has underwritten unlimited liability for itself. Company does not have unlimited liability. Company always have unlimited liability, but that falls on the society. The Bhopal gas tragedy, the Satyam debacle, all this brunt is taken by the society, not the shareholders. If you keep on benefiting one set of stakeholders at the cost of another, in the long run, company can't survive. I can't be loser always when you keep on benefiting. That is where we need balance that while you benefit, you do not benefit too much, and while I lose, I don't lose too much. That's why we have set up norms which talk about the disclosures, independent directors, the regulation of the related party transactions, key managerial personnel, auditors, and at times going to also to address the problems, taxes, subsidies, and the latest intervention is the CSR in 2013 Act. So all that they try to do is they minimize the conflict of interest between these two sets of stakeholders, try to subordinate the interest of the stakeholders to that of the company, and to establish the precedence of the interest of the society over the company. This is one set. Another bigger set, where the committee of creditors have a bigger role, is that this is the balance between the present and future. A company is expected, as I told, it's supposed to have indefinite life, to serve the posterity with higher and higher prosperity forever. But if it lives too much on the present, its future is compromised and vice versa. If you take too much care of the present time, too focused and don't bother about the future, you won't survive the competition and innovation. If you do not have strategies of resilience, adaptation, innovation, research, risk management, sustainable business model, researching into preparedness for unknown unknowns, visionary leadership, these do not come from any law, any mandate. The first set of things I told, limited, unlimited, has come as of now to a large extent under the corporate governance norms. These are actually corporate governance norms, but we have not moved that far. But these are also equally important. The life of the company is as important as the life of a human being, and it needs to be saved. That's why the law provides different layers of security to protect the life of companies, starting from the executive management, board of directors. Board of directors fail to deliver, then we say shareholders can throw them out and bring a new set of shareholders. And shareholders are failing, then through market for corporate control, we bring another set of more promising set of shareholders. And even if when they fail, then we have the kind of a Brahmastra. The Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code brings the committee of creditors with much more powers, where they can take 100% haircut. They can also give 100% haircut to every other stakeholder. That is the power they have been given. Only if it is in the interest of the company to rescue the company, to resolve the insolvency. So this law enables the committee of creditors to step in to rescue the company. It enables, gives the rights when to start, how to conclude, provides a complete mechanism to do all this. So the committee of creditors have a much higher responsibility, as I told in the orchestra. They have the lead responsibility starting from the trigger. What they have to do is, they have to invoke at the right time, and after invoking, they have to identify the company. These companies are failing, that's why they have defaulted, and you need to rescue the company. You come in to rescue, and after a while you conclude that rescue is not possible, you go for liquidation. But how do you conclude this? It's possible that this firm which has started into this process is a company where every other firm in the industry is doing badly. So if every firm is doing badly, obviously there is something wrong with the entire environment. It could have happened because of the innovation, business is no more viable, could be change in policy, technology, probably you are close to a mine and mine is completely exhausted. So there is no way this company can be resolved. And only way, these are the companies which we call are in economic distress. Only option available to this is that these are failing and unviable. Close these with least pain, least cost, as early as possible, release the resources for alternatives. This is what we call creative destruction. But of these companies, there could still be a rare company which has good human resources, good technology, can reorient its business to another line, change product, change marketing style, can do something, and can also be revived. Though failing and unviable, but there can be someone who can rescue it. Or the farm belongs to an industry where every other farm is doing well except my farm, and that is because of my own inefficiency, my own mismanagement. Sometimes it could be my malfeasance also. So something wrong in my business model, wrong product, something I am not able to do efficiently. But there could be another person who can convert this failing but viable business to a running corporate debtor. So these are the companies which are in financial distress, which needs to be rescued, in the words of Supreme Court, from the current management as well as from the liquidation. And that is what this law provides. But of these companies, there could still be a few companies, though it's failing on account of competition, but it has depleted its resources so much that turnaround may be almost impossible. But how do you recognize that this is a failing viable, this is a failing unviable? There is no mathematical formula to this. Somebody can't say that if your liquidation value is more than there are somebody saying recently that some value came under a resolution plan which was less than liquidation value and it was not approved. I am not getting into that, but only thing I want to say that the commercial decisions do not go by the mathematical precision. You can't say A is more than B, then we really do not need committee of creditors. Anybody else can apply the formula, any postgraduate has a formula and calculator can decide. So economic decisions are not like that actually. You have to really understand business. The committee of creditors, they were good, great financial bankers. Supreme Court recognizes that, has given them the complete freedom, supremacy. There are efforts to build their capacity also. Thanks to SBI, we have done 4 workshops for the bankers, particularly senior bankers. There is effort all around to build the capacity, but the bankers have to be actually be businessmen to trigger, to sit in the committee of creditors, identify the company which is worth saving, for which you should make effort. And once you have identified that the company is worth saving, you should save it, then how do you save it? That means you have to create a visibility of the value of the company, underlying value. In Bombay, sitting in Bombay, somebody who makes an IPO, the kind of effort he makes and tries to convince shareholders to buy one share, that there is a value for you and people come and buy. So that kind of effort is required on the part of the COC to create a visibility. And if it is a viable firm, you should be able to generate many competing resolution plans and not saying that there are no takers. There are takers for IPOs in the country also. There are takers even for small firms. We see BSE now they have an SME platform. We see in the last 2-3 months how much money they are able to raise. So you need to tell what you have, and if your price is right, actually everything sells in the market. So you have to create, you are a market participant, create visibility of the value and tell upfront your mind. That's why there is a requirement that you have to tell the evaluation metrics. Tell your mind that what can result in insolvency other than haircut. Haircut is the easiest thing, but I don't think the product is not selling. As much as a haircut you can take, probably the company may not revive. That's why law says that law expects anything that results in insolvency. You can change product management, technology, sell, buy, whatever is required, please do it. You are empowered, you have infinite power under the law to do anything required to save the company. But take a commercial call, tell people beforehand that this is what can resolve, this is what we are looking at. Also engage an IP who can run the company on commercial principle for 6 months, 9 months, or whatever time is required, gives complete information, responds to resolution applicants. He should also be business savvy, and you should choose the right IRP for that, and then ensure that the critical economic decision is finding out other formalities are there, it complies with law, all those things are there. Resolution applicant will do also a lot about due diligence. But 2 things, the law uses the word feasibility and viability. How do you see this? The business proposal has come, other than the haircut part. Is it feasible, viable? Is there a market? Is there a technology? Has it come from a credible, capable person? Again, these are the commercial decisions for which there is no formula. In fact, everybody in the system needs capacity building. I think the next session, Mr. Abhijor is having the question on capacity building. Everybody needs capacity starting from IBC. But only submission I wanted to make is that everybody, like IBC, IBBI, IP, we are actually onlookers. See from a distance what you are doing. Resolution applicant is taking a commercial decision, but rescue is in your hands. You are leading the rescue party. And you can do justice to this role given to you, and the economy can reap the full benefits of having insolvency and bankruptcy regime and justify its well-founded objects only if the COC behaves well. And avoid any kind of premature death to any company. Thank you. Thanks to IBA for giving me this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir, for your inspiring speech. Now I request Mr. V.G. Kannan, Chief Executive, Indian Banks Association, to propose a vote of thanks.
Good morning to all of you. Quite a detailed analysis of the process which has gone through. and many of my banker friends here would actually start looking at the role they have been playing in the COC. At the outset, let me thank Mr. G.K. Singh, Joint Secretary, Ministry of Corporate Affairs, Government of India, Mr. M.S. Sahu, Chairman IBBI, my good friend and Chairman Indian Bank, State Bank of India and Indian Banks Association, Mr. Rajesh Kumar, for gracing the occasion with their kind presence. I also thank Mr. Shrawat, Judicial Member NCLT, for having agreed to participate in the panel despite his busy schedule. I am also grateful to Mr. Vaibhav Chaturvedi, who has agreed to participate in the panel despite this being a holiday in RBI. Unlike other areas, the insolvency and bankruptcy process is very critical and has received the attention of the bankers, borrowers, investors, regulators of course, politicians, consultants, law firms, CA firms, valuers, and of course the media. Except for the bankers who have always been at the receiving end, and including, I recall, a banker invoking the divine intervention of God for an early solution, many of the other participants have been laughing their way to the bank. A number of new jobs have been created, namely the IRP, the IP, RP, valuers, NCLT members also. So therefore, this is another way of job creation. Not a single day goes without at least 2 or 3 news items on this judicial process of finding a resolution to stress assets. Media, of course, has been deliberating even this much after the cows come home. Such is the interest for this process. IBA, on its part, has played an active role in making suggestions. I would also thank all panelists, dignitaries, and other participants for attending the second edition of this ARC organized by IBA. A brief mention about what has been discussed in the morning, early in the program. Mr. Singh mentioned about the impressive performance post-IBC with statistics and the numbers. Very impressive indeed, sir. There have been very speedy decisions. The augmentation of the NCLT courts and the staff, the constant tweaking to the IBC as an ongoing process to plug the loopholes. However, sir, dil mange more. There has also been mention about the stress asset market and continuation effort by the regulators, a platform for sale and purchase. I was part of a committee along with Abhizar here to prepare a roadmap of sale of secondary markets of loans. And I understand that RBI has initiated the process in this. Mr. Sahu also mentioned about the development of the new profession for IRP. Sir, my take is we need to have IBC as a process which is a deterrent to be least used, not as a hangman to be kept busy. Yes, mindset has changed. New courses, specialization in this has been developed. CRP also has been started against the personal guarantee of corporate debtors as mentioned by him. He certainly stressed the importance of the COC in taking decisions. The need for a resolution quickly is of utmost importance. And he said in many areas where the resolution has given a value much beyond the liquidation value, which is possibly the only way we were looking at it. A company need not always survive. It has to be close to a logical end, partly because of innovation, because of creation, because of R&D, and the new demands in the situation. You cannot keep on keeping the company alive. There's a lot of resources of the public, the government, etc., which is being wasted. The importance of and the role of the COC, I think in the second half of his speech was totally only on the COC role. I think all the banker friends here may have to take note of this particular mention of this. The last 3 speakers have been speaking more of the IBC process. Sir, this is an asset resolution process, program, not an IBC program. So we need to proactively act to get a resolution outside the NCLT. Unfortunately, every other case, the first thing they say, why are you not taking it to NCLT? And I'm sorry to say, but most of the bankers also feel taking the route to the NCLT is safer. The 3 Cs don't come and haunt them. So I think we have to have a change in the mindset. I think the role of the IBBI, role of the bankers and IBA chairman as also the MCA, we need to change this mindset of the bankers that NCLT appears to be the best process. The only other alternative is the sale to ARC, which is like postponing the issue. I think we need to change it so that we can have a haircut outside the NCLT process, change the management. That would possibly be the best way forward. Since its inception of IBA in 1946 with 22 members, sir, we are older than the Indian democracy. IBA has expanded to 252 members across Indian banking, including public sector, private sector, foreign banks, financial institutions, to emerge as the voice of the Indian banking and provide a consultative platform to charter the growth of the banking and financial service industry. I agree, sir, the IBC has changed the mindset of the bankers and the debtors. Bankers have realized that they are now Hanuman, not the helpless monkeys. Asset resolution is the key enabler for Indian banking system, and we hope that this conference today will provide key inputs to all stakeholders in the Indian financial ecosystem for supporting revival of GDP growth in the country. I observed large interest among all kinds of stakeholders, and this is reflected to the participants gathered here. Participants here, you will never get an opportunity where the originators of the code, the users of the code like the bankers, the regulators to the code, the regulators for the users of the code, and the participants to the code process are all here at one go. Chairman mentioned about the judicial pronouncements and the jurisprudence which has enabled speedy resolutions, and going forward we feel the process will be much faster. Before I go, I would like to raise a couple of points, sir, a little bit more operational. Recently, the RBI has written to us stating that the forensic audit report should be submitted within 3 months. While in a few cases this is reasonable, quite often these reports take a long time and also affects the final resolution process. As seen in a few cases, some thoughts on how we should speed up the process. Recently, a few bankers who are nominee directors, I will mention to you, sir, have been hauled up and slapped with criminal cases where the promoter has apparently siphoned off funds. Such actions and others could deter bank officials from taking on the role of nominee directors, and banks themselves maybe not be willing to appoint. And this will further aggravate the situation in a resolution. There is a need to have a serious look into this, which has sent shivers amongst the bankers. I once again thank you all for coming to this conference, and I hope you have a great day ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you once again, dignitaries on stage, for sparing your valuable time and for being here with us today. I wish you all a pleasant day. Ladies and gentlemen, this brings us to the end of the inaugural and keynote sessions.